My boss fired me on my maternity leave and said I was replaceable. 2 weeks later, his top client called me with an offer he can't beat. I sat in the cold hospital bed, my newborn daughter, Maya, wrapped in a pink blanket against my chest. My body was tired, but my heart was full. Then, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an email from Richard, my boss of 15 years. I thought it was a congratulations note or a picture of the flowers the office usually sent. Instead, the subject line read, "Notice of redundancy." My breath hitched as I read the words. "Your position has been terminated effective immediately." Richard wrote that the company was moving in a different direction and my services were no longer needed. The last sentence felt like a slap across my face. "You're replaceable, Amira. Enjoy your time off." I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. My career was gone before I even left the hospital. The silence of the hospital room suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. I tried to call the office, but my extension had already been disconnected. By the time I got home 3 days later, the financial reality hit me like a brick. My maternity pay, which I had counted on to cover Maya's first few months, stopped instantly. The mortgage payment was due, and the hospital bills were stacking up on the kitchen counter. Every time I looked at my daughter, I felt a wave of sharp panic. How could Richard do this to me after I gave that company my best years? The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. Then, I saw it on LinkedIn. My replacement, a woman half my age, posted a photo of my old desk. "So excited to be joining the best company ever," she wrote. I spent the next morning on the phone with HR, desperate for answers. I told them I had a contract and that firing a woman on maternity leave was wrong. The HR director, someone I used to eat lunch with, sounded like a robot. "I'm sorry, Amira, but it was a budget constraint. The position simply doesn't exist anymore." I reminded her that they just hired someone else for my exact role, but she hung up on me. That same afternoon, I saw a post on the company's Instagram page. They weren't struggling with money at all. They were hosting a lavish, gold-themed conference at a 5-star hotel downtown. Richard was in the front row, laughing and holding a glass of champagne. If you want to see how I turned this heartbreak into $1 million victory, hit subscribe now for more. I couldn't sleep that night, so I started digging through social media. I found a post from a former coworker who had a few too many drinks at the conference. In the background of one video, I saw Richard with his arm around the new girl, Sarah. It clicked instantly. Sarah wasn't just my replacement. She was Richard's new girlfriend. She had no marketing experience and had never managed a budget in her life, but she was available full-time and didn't have a baby to worry about. My phone buzzed with a private message from a friend still at the office. "Amira, it's worse than you think. Richard is telling everyone you couldn't handle the pressure anymore. He's bragging about how much dead weight he cut by letting you go." It was 3 a.m., and the only light in the room came from the glowing baby monitor. Maya was finally asleep, but my mind was racing. I sat in the rocking chair, tears streaming down my face, feeling older and more tired than I ever had before. I looked at a draft of a resignation email I had started, thinking maybe I should just quit quietly to save my dignity. But then I looked at Maya's face. Why should I go away quietly while he destroyed my reputation? I realized I had spent 15 years building that department from nothing. I knew where every cent was spent and how every client was won. I gripped my phone tightly and deleted the draft. I vowed right then that I would never beg for that job again. I was going to fight. The next morning, my husband, David, found me sitting at the kitchen table with my old laptop. He brought me a cup of coffee and placed his hand on my shoulder. I told him everything Richard had said and how they had replaced me with someone who didn't know the business. David didn't look worried. He looked proud. "Amira, look at me," he said firmly. "You built that department with your own sweat. You are the reason they have those big contracts. He thinks he can just delete your hard work, but he's wrong. He will regret the day he chose to treat you like this." His words gave me a spark of hope I hadn't felt since the hospital. I opened my personal cloud drive and saw the folders I had backed up over the years. My old project files were all there. I started scrolling through the folders, and a specific name caught my eye, Brightwave Tech. I remembered the day I landed that account 5 years ago. It was the biggest win in the company's history. I had spent 6 months designing their entire marketing architecture from the ground up. I worked through weekends and skipped holidays to make sure their system was perfect. I was the only one who truly understood the complicated data models we built for them. As I looked at the files, I realized that Richard's firm was still using my exact system to manage Brightwave's millions. Every strategy, Every automated trigger and every creative template was something I had personally created. Without me there to maintain the backend, that entire system was a ticking time bomb. I stared at the screen, a plan beginning to form. Money was getting tighter every day, so I finally went to apply for unemployment benefits. I figured it would at least help buy diapers and formula while I planned my next move. A week later, I received a letter in the mail that made my blood boil. My claim was denied. The reason listed was that I had quit voluntarily. I called the unemployment office, shaking with anger. They told me that my former company had submitted a signed resignation form in my name. I knew I had never signed anything. Richard or HR had forged my signature just to avoid paying out my benefits or increasing their insurance rates. They were trying to starve me out so I wouldn't have the resources to fight back. I sat on the floor and cried, feeling like the world was closing in. I called my old college friend, Sarah, who worked in city government. She listened to my story and immediately gave me the phone number for Dana, a powerful corporate attorney known for winning tough cases. When I met Dana in her glass-walled office, I showed her the resignation letter. Dana looked at it for 2 seconds and tossed it on her desk. "This signature is a bad fake, Amira," she said with a sharp smile. "What they did is highly illegal. Firing you on leave and forging documents is a winning case." She leaned forward and looked me in the eyes. "But we have to decide how we play this. Do you want simple justice through a settlement, or do you want total revenge?" I didn't even have to think about it. "I want both," I replied. Dana told me we needed to move fast. She instructed me to collect every bit of evidence I could find, old emails, performance reviews, and timestamps of when I was working during my pregnancy. I spent hours at night, while Maya slept, organizing my digital life into a weapon. I found the emails where Richard praised me as the backbone of the company just months before he fired me. Then, I tried something I thought wouldn't work. I opened the company's internal portal and typed in my old credentials. To my shock, the screen logged in. Richard was so arrogant and lazy that he hadn't even told the IT department to revoke my access yet. I was still inside their system, and I could see everything they were doing. I held my breath as I realized I had the keys to the kingdom. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the internal messages. I found a private chat group between Richard and his girlfriend, Sarah. My stomach turned as I read the messages. "Don't worry about the transition," Richard had typed. "Amira has mom brain now anyway. She wouldn't have been able to keep up with the new pace." Sarah replied with laughing emojis, calling me a dinosaur who was better off at home with a diaper bag. They mocked my years of dedication, calling me dead weight that needed to be cut for the company to truly shine. One message from Richard made me freeze. "We'll take her clients, use her systems, and she'll be too busy with the baby to ever notice." They weren't just replacing me. They were planning to steal my legacy. I realized that Richard's arrogance was his biggest weakness. Because he thought I was just a mom now, he hadn't bothered to change the administrative passwords I had set up years ago. I navigated to the client database for Brightwave Tech. I saw that I still had master control over the proprietary marketing models I had built. These weren't just files, they were complex pieces of intellectual property that I had legally retained rights to in my original employment contract, a detail Richard had clearly forgotten. I carefully copied my strategies, the custom code, and the long-term growth models onto my secure drive. I wasn't stealing, I was reclaiming my own mind. If you want to see how I used this data to dismantle his entire empire, hit subscribe for more revenge. The next step required a delicate touch. I reached out to a contact I had in the tech journalism world. I didn't give my name, but I provided a tip about a major local firm that was illegally terminating new mothers and forging legal documents to save money. 2 days later, an anonymous blog post appeared on a popular industry site. It didn't name the company yet, but it gave enough details about the Gold Conference and the redundancy scandal that everyone in our city's business circle knew exactly who it was. The post went viral within hours. People were outraged. I watched from my kitchen table as the comment section exploded with stories of other women who had been treated poorly by Richard. The fire was starting to burn. The atmosphere at the office must have been pure chaos. Through the internal portal, I saw Richard sending frantic, all-caps emails to the entire staff. "Who leaked this?" he demanded in one thread. "Find the rat immediately." He was terrified because he had several big investors looking at the company for a potential buyout, and a scandal like this would kill the deal instantly. I saw him tell HR to delete old files, but I had already saved everything. Investors started calling his private line, asking for a formal statement about the rumors. Richard was panicking, snapping at his staff, and making even more mistakes. He was so focused on finding Alika that he never once stopped to think that the person he hurt most was watching his every move. Then, the moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. My phone pinged with a direct message on LinkedIn. It was from Julian, the CEO of Brightwave Tech. We had worked closely together for 5 years, and he always respected my work. Amira, his message read, I saw some troubling news online today. I also noticed that our latest campaign reports look messy. The logic seems broken. My team tells me you are no longer with the firm. I need to know the truth. Did you really design the entire Brightwave system yourself, or was it a team effort like Richard is claiming now? I took a deep breath, looked at Maya, and typed back, yes, Julian. Every line of code and every strategy was mine alone. And I can prove it. Julian responded within seconds, asking if we could meet for a private lunch. I dressed in my best professional suit, feeling like the old Amira again, though my heart was still heavy with the weight of the last few weeks. We met at a quiet bistro away from the downtown offices. Julian looked frustrated. Richard's team is failing without you, Amira, he admitted, shaking his head. They tried to run the quarterly update yesterday, and the whole system crashed. Sarah tried to explain it away, but it's clear she has no idea how the architecture works. He leaned across the table, his eyes searching mine. The board is losing confidence in Richard's firm. We can't have our data handled by amateurs. He took a sip of water and asked, how would you feel about building something new? My pulse quickened as Julian explained his vision. He didn't just want me back as an employee, he wanted me as an expert consultant to fix the mess Richard had created. He offered me a contract that was worth more than double my old salary. I need you to work under an NDA for now, Julian whispered, sliding a folder across the table. I'm going to pull the account from Richard, but I need a transition plan in place first. If he knows you're involved, he'll try to block the data transfer. I signed the non-disclosure agreement with a steady hand. My new mission was clear. I would work from home, quietly rebuilding the Brightwave system on my own servers. Don't tell Richard yet, Julian cautioned. Let him think he still has a chance to fix it. While I was working secretly for Julian, Richard's PR team was busy trying to save his reputation. They issued a public statement on their website, trying to bury the viral blog post. We wish to clarify that Amira, a valued employee, chose to move on voluntarily to focus on her growing family, the statement read. We support her decision and wish her the best. It was a bold, disgusting lie. I felt a surge of cold fury as I read it. My lawyer, Dana, called me immediately. He's digging his own grave with these public lies, she said. She already had a rebuttal drafted that proved the resignation was a forgery, but she told me to wait. Let him get comfortable in his lie, Amira. The fall is much harder when they think they've won. The tension finally snapped a week later. Julian sent an official notice to Richard's firm. Brightwave Tech was moving their $1 million account away immediately due to technical incompetence and breach of trust. I watched through the internal portal as the office turned into a war zone. Richard went into a full-blown panic. He called Julian 30 times in 1 hour, begging for a meeting to renegotiate. We can fix the system. Richard screamed into his speakerphone, and I could hear it through a recording a friend sent me. Just give us 1 more month. But Julian was done. He told Richard that the decision was final and that a new firm would be handling the migration. Richard had no idea that the new firm was actually just me in my home office. I officially registered my own consulting business, Revive Strategies. Using the files I had reclaimed and the new architecture I had built for Julian, I was ready to take over. When the contract was officially signed, the first payment hit my account, and it was more money than I had ever seen at once. I sat in my living room, holding Maya, and looked at the confirmation on my screen. I was now the primary contractor for the biggest tech company in the region. Richard was still frantically trying to find out who had stolen his client, searching for a big corporate rival to blame. He hadn't realized that his biggest threat wasn't a rival firm. It was the woman he had dismissed as replaceable. Richard didn't know the truth yet, but he was about to. The industry gossip spread like a wildfire through the city's business district. Richard's ex-employee stole his top client. People were whispering in elevators and coffee shops. The irony was too delicious for anyone to ignore. Richard finally connected the dots when he saw my name listed as the primary contact on a digital transfer request for Brightwave's data. My phone started ringing incessantly. It was him. When I finally answered, his voice was a mixture of pure rage and disbelief. "You backstabbing snake," he hissed. "You stole that account while you were on my payroll. I'll sue you for everything you have. I stayed perfectly calm, looking at the legal documents Dana had prepared. I wasn't on your payroll, Richard, I reminded him. You fired me from my hospital bed, remember? You said I was replaceable. I just took your advice. Richard didn't stop. He began a desperate campaign to smear my name to anyone who would listen. He called me again, his voice cracking with a sneer. You think a single mom with a crying baby can actually replace a firm like mine? You're a freelancer, Amira. You're a fluke. Julian will realize his mistake and come crawling back to a real professional. I felt a strange sense of peace as he yelled. I wasn't the scared woman in the hospital bed anymore. You already did that when you fired me, Richard, I replied. You replaced me with someone you liked, but you forgot to replace the person who actually knew how to do the work. Before he could scream another insult, I hung up mid-sentence. I blocked his number and went back to feeding Maya. If you want to see the moment he finally collapsed, hit subscribe now. While Richard was busy throwing tantrums, Dana was finalizing our legal offensive. We weren't just going after him for the account, we were going for his throat. She filed a massive lawsuit for wrongful termination, pregnancy discrimination, and the forgery of the resignation letter. We had the metadata from the company's servers showing exactly when the document was created, 2 hours after I was fired. We also had the internal messages mocking my mom brain. The evidence was overwhelming. Dana called me with a triumphant tone in her voice. The court has set a hearing date for next month, Amira. They tried to offer a small settlement to make this go away, but I told them no. We want this on the public record. I agreed. I didn't want his money, I wanted his accountability. The storm was building. Brightwave Tech decided to delay their public announcement about our new partnership to align perfectly with the start of my court case. They wanted the world to know they stood with me. Richard, however, still lived in a fantasy world. He told his remaining staff that the Brightwave loss was temporary and that he could buy them back with a new pitch. He spent thousands on a new marketing presentation, led by his girlfriend, Sarah. He had no idea that Julian had already blocked his email address. Every move Richard made was a waste of time and money. He was bleeding cash and losing his grip on reality. As the hearing date approached, the tension in the city's corporate circles was at an all-time high. Everyone was waiting for the fallout. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed with reporters and former colleagues. Richard sat at the defense table, smirking and whispering to his high-priced lawyers. He looked like he thought he was untouchable. But the smirk vanished the moment Dana stood up. She presented the digital proof of the fake resignation, followed by the printed logs of the mom brain chat messages. The judge's face turned into a mask of pure disgust. Richard's lawyers tried to argue that it was all office banter, but the judge wasn't having it. This is a clear case of malicious discrimination and fraud, the judge declared. He ordered my immediate reinstatement, which I declined, and hit the firm with massive fines for damages. The justice arc had begun, and Richard looked like he was about to be sick. The courtroom victory was only the beginning of the end for Richard. By the time I walked out of the building, news headlines were already exploding across every major business site. CEO fired new mom on leave, court rules in her favor, shouted the lead story on the city's largest news portal. The public reaction was even more intense than the viral blog post. People were sharing my story as a symbol of every woman who had been pushed out of their career. Richard's face was plastered everywhere, and not as the successful businessman he pretended to be. To add the final touch, Brightwave Tech's official account posted a tweet that went across the globe. We support strong women in business and are proud to partner with Revive Strategies. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages of support. The public fall was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours of the court ruling, Richard's board of directors held an emergency meeting. They couldn't ignore the massive damage to the company's brand or the fleeing investors. They issued a cold, formal statement announcing that Richard was being forced to step down temporarily, pending a full internal review. He was escorted out of the building he had spent 20 years building. Even worse for his ego, his girlfriend, Sarah, was fired immediately. The board realized she was only hired because of their relationship and lacked any of the skills needed to save my old department. They were cleaning house, but the house was already empty. Richard had lost his power, his partner, and his reputation all in one weekend. The man who called me replaceable was now gone. While Richard's world collapsed, mine was finally finding a beautiful, steady rhythm. I officially launched the headquarters of Revive Strategies from a beautiful office space that overlooked the park where I used to walk with Maya. Brightwave Tech became my first long-term client, signing a 3-year deal that secured my future. I sat down at my new mahogany desk and opened my first official invoice. As I typed in the total, I realized the amount matched my entire old yearly salary at Richard's firm for just 1 month of consulting. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. I looked at the framed photo of Maya on my desk and felt a quiet, powerful triumph. I had turned a moment of total weakness into a position of absolute strength. The collapse of Richard's firm continued like a row of falling dominoes. Without the Brightwave account and with Richard's name in the mud, other major clients began to panic. They didn't want to be associated with a company known for fraud and discrimination. In a single week, the firm lost 3 more of its biggest accounts. My phone started ringing again, but this time it wasn't Richard screaming. It was those very clients. 2 of them, who I had worked with for years, asked if Revive Strategies had room to take them on. "We trust you, Amira," one of them said. "We never trusted Richard." By the end of the month, my small team was growing, and I was taking over the very market Richard thought he owned. I was rebuilding the industry in my image. A few months later, I attended a major regional tech conference. I was there as a keynote speaker to talk about ethical leadership. As I was walking through the lobby, I saw a man sitting alone on a bench, looking disheveled and tired. It was Richard. He looked 10 years older. He stood up when he saw me, cornering me near the elevators. "You ruined me, Amira," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and regret. "I lost everything. The firm, my house, my name. Are you happy?" I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a deep sense of closure. "You taught me I was replaceable, Richard," I replied calmly. "Turns out, so were you." I walked away as the cameras from the press caught the entire exchange. The video of our encounter in the hotel lobby went viral within an hour. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was a cultural moment. People watched Richard stumble over his words while I stood tall, radiating the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. The public sympathy for me skyrocketed, and my story became a rallying cry for working mothers everywhere. I received thousands of emails from women sharing their own struggles with bosses like Richard. They saw my victory as their own. Meanwhile, Richard's attempt to play the victim backfired completely. The internet didn't see a broken man, they saw a bully who finally got what he deserved. His desperate face on camera became a meme for corporate arrogance. My brand, Revive, wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement for justice and respect in the workplace. As Revive Strategies continued to dominate the market, the board at Brightwave Tech took notice of my leadership. Julian called me into a private meeting in their top-floor boardroom. "Amira, you have done more for our growth in 6 months than Richard's firm did in 6 years, he said, sliding a gold-trimmed document toward me. It was an official offer to become the Chief Marketing Officer of Brightwave Tech. The salary and stock options were astronomical, enough to secure Maya's future for 10 lifetimes. It was the dream job I would have died for just a year ago. I looked at the offer, then out the window at the city skyline. I thought about the freedom I had built and the mothers I was now helping. I smiled and gently pushed the paper back. I declined the offer. Julian was shocked, but I explained that my vision had grown bigger than one company. I wanted to use my success to mentor young mothers who were starting their own businesses. I launched a new branch of Revive called the Irreplaceable Initiative. We provided microgrants, legal support, and business coaching for women who had been pushed out of their jobs due to family obligations. A new movement began under my brand, and it felt more rewarding than any corporate title could ever be. I was no longer just a marketing expert, I was a builder of dreams. I spent my days surrounded by brilliant, determined women who were taking back their power. My office was filled with the sound of ideas and the occasional coo of a baby. I had created the world I once needed. The final legal settlement from the court was released a few weeks later. The judge had been thorough, leaving no stone unturned in the pursuit of justice. Richard and his crumbling firm were ordered to pay me every cent of back pay I had missed, plus massive interest and all of my legal fees. On top of that, the punitive damages were record-breaking. When the check finally arrived in the mail, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the numbers. It was a staggering amount of money. I didn't spend a dime of it on myself. Instead, I opened a high-interest trust fund and deposited the entire check in Maya's name. I wanted the man who tried to take everything from me to be the one who funded my daughter's entire education. It was the ultimate poetic justice. A few days after the settlement, I received a handwritten letter at my office. I recognized the messy, cramped handwriting immediately. It was from Richard. He wrote that he was living in a small apartment and that he had been blacklisted from the industry. I underestimated you, Amira, the letter started. I didn't realize how much of the firm's success was actually yours. I made a mistake, and I am paying for it every day. He sounded like a man trying to fish for a shred of forgiveness or perhaps a job. I didn't feel any pity. I remembered the cold hospital room and the replaceable email. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and mailed it back to him, unread and unmarked. The past was dead. The anniversary of Maya's birth arrived, and we decided to host a double celebration. It was a baby and business party held in the courtyard of my new office building. My entire team was there, along with Julian from Brightwave and dozens of the women I had mentored through my initiative. The air was filled with laughter and the smell of spring flowers. During the toast, Julian stood up and shared the latest news. Under Amira's strategies, Brightwave has seen record growth this year, he announced to the cheering crowd. I looked around at the faces of people who respected and valued me. I wasn't just a cog in a machine anymore, I was the heart of a community. I realized that my life hadn't just restarted, it had been upgraded in every possible way. My success was the sweetest revenge. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Maya was tucked into her crib, I sat in my quiet home office. I pulled up my old personal email account and searched for that one specific message. I found it, the termination notice Richard had sent while I was in the hospital. I read the word replaceable one last time. It didn't sting anymore. It felt like a joke from a different lifetime. I realized that keeping that email had been a heavy burden I no longer needed to carry. I hit the delete button and watched the screen clear. I emptied the trash folder for good measure, feeling a physical weight lift off my shoulders. The closure was total. I walked into Maya's room and listened to her steady breathing, a perfect echo of the peace I had finally found. The next morning, I bought a beautiful gold frame and placed my new business license inside it. I hung it on the wall of my home office, right beside Maya's birth certificate. I stood back and looked at the two documents side by side. Both were dated within the same month. Born the same month my life restarted, I whispered to myself. One represented the gift of motherhood, and the other represented the gift of my own strength. They were a matched set. I realized that I would never have found the courage to build Revive if Richard hadn't pushed me off the cliff. He tried to destroy me, but he actually gave me the keys to a better world. I was no longer defined by where I worked, but by what I had built. David came into the room and wrapped his arms around me, looking at the framed papers. He remembered the nights I spent crying and the days I spent fighting for every inch of progress. He raised a glass of orange juice in a quiet, private toast. To being irreplaceable, Amira, he said with a wink. I leaned against him and smiled. I always was, I replied. He was just too small to see it. The house was quiet and full of light. I didn't have to worry about a boss or a corporate ladder or being good enough for someone else's standards. I had created a life where my worth was non-negotiable. I felt a deep, steady happiness that no paycheck could ever provide. I was finally the master of my own destiny. He fired me thinking motherhood made me weak. He forgot it made me unstoppable. He replaced me at work with a shadow of my talent, and in return, I replaced his entire presence in the business world. Some replacements can't be undone, and some mistakes cost you everything. Richard lost his best client, his firm, and his dignity because he couldn't see the value in the woman who built his empire. I didn't just survive his betrayal, I used it as the foundation for a legacy that will last long after he is forgotten. I found my purpose in the very place he tried to leave me behind. He lost his best client, but I found my true self. I am Amira, I am a mother, and I am truly irreplaceable. My story is just beginning. Thank you. Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.